Is Josh Taylor British or just Scottish? It's a question asked to many Scottish athletes throughout history, and also I don't think in the last 20 years Scottish boxing has ever really stepped out of the shadow of the English. Plus, if you are English, like me, you're pretty much bred to hate the Scots for just so long until they actually become successful. Thinking back to Andy Murray, newspapers were pretty much crucifying him. After when he was asked who he'd support at the World Cup, he said he'd support whoever England were playing against. You'd have thought the guy smeared the English flag with 3 pounds of rotting haggis. But who knew winning Wimbledon would actually do the guy's popularity some good down south? The press went from criticising him over and over, replaced with the sounds of fans cheering him on from a mound that bears his name. A slight detour perhaps, but I think it's important when you look at Scottish sport as a whole that so many Scottish athletes and indeed people become labelled as British when they reach that top level, and that's where I think Josh Taylor stands out. Because apart from athletes like Andy Murray and like Chris Hoy, I think Josh Taylor isn't really Scottish, he is Scottish through and through. It's pretty common knowledge now that Anthony Joshua actually started boxing fairly old at 18. But how old do you think Josh Taylor was when he started? Josh Taylor was only 16, so even though he was a couple of years younger than Joshua, he wasn't actually that much younger. He was British Taekwondo champ at 15, so he was no real stranger to the you're getting your head caved in kind of business. But it's not really the story we're told time and time again of when the father brings their son down to the gym and then 10 years later they're lifting him up as world champ. Which is kind of odd because again you can make parallels between him and Anthony Joshua. Joshua fought for the Commonwealth title in his 14th fight and Klitschko for his 19th. Where some of the heavyweights just took a little bit longer than that before they reached that top level. But Taylor managed to fight in Vegas, headline in his own hometown, fight on a pay-per-view card, and for the Commonwealth title in 8 fights. 8 fights? Joshua was only really starting to fight fighters with a pulse back then, and Wilder was still fighting guys who never had one. And looking back in hindsight, Taylor was always going to be one of those fighters who really excelled in the pros, despite being a very, very handy amateur himself. His biggest highlight in the amateurs was that 2014 Glasgow gold medal.
Josh! Nah, you got something right. Josh!
But if I was going to ask you who beat him in the 2010 Commonwealth Games, I don't think you'd be able to tell me because honestly, I had no idea. But it was Thomas Stalker, the guy who, with all due respect, lost before any world title shots were even on the cards. Admittedly, Taylor was only 19, but I hope I made my point. To my eye, Taylor was always a guy who had that mean streak about him, that glint in a fighter's eye when you can tell they actually want to hurt their opponent. Some people can see that attribute as a negative, and it can be. Letting the emotions take over and allowing yourself to go just that bit crazy is not boxing. But for Taylor, it's more the fire inside the furnace than the blaze burning down the apartment. And it was this aggression that was on full show in his first real test against Ohara Davies back in July 2017. Ohara Davies, an Englishman going up to Scotland, was never going to have much in the way of support. But saying things like this to the press...
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to open...
You guys are even lucky that I even came in. I was actually in bed. You guys are even lucky that I came in. Like, honestly, I was in bed, yeah. I was in bed lying down, I got the phone call and I thought, I actually wasn't going to turn up. I genuinely wasn't going to turn up.
I mean, you really do have to win at that point. It was both cringy and annoying, the stuff he spouted. He managed to be both hated by the English and the Scots, something that most politicians even struggle to do. And it was here that we saw that aggression come to the surface. A guy who doesn't always say a lot, but in this era of politically correct boxers and fighters who go out there and are happy to win a lopsided decision, Taylor showed how spiteful he can be. And that he may go on to fight on pay-per-views in corporate stadiums with sponsorship deals, but if you're a front of something he wants, he will try and cave your fucking head in. Coming into the fight, it was the lankier and more powerful Davies versus the faster and more well-schooled Taylor. And despite 1 or 2 shaky moments, Taylor showed he was a class above. And what chance Davies did have, he threw away when he started trading on the inside against a faster man with much shorter arms. Despite a win on terrestrial TV, Taylor wasn't anywhere near a household name. He kind of fell into that weird phase for a boxer when you kind of have your own fan base, but you're not really doing pay-per-views on the regular. Think Josh Warrington, Terence Crawford or Callum Smith and you'll get a good idea of where Taylor was in his career. It's kind of fitting then that, like those fighters, Taylor did the most important thing and just kept on winning. And with wins over Victor Postol and even Branchek, he faced a challenge now of doing what Carl Froch, Ricky Burns and Ricky Hatton couldn't do in defeating an undefeated, highly touted American who was touted as the real deal. The talks surrounding the Prograis fight really did sell a 50-50. Taylor had shown me that he had the ability to turn it into a dogfight. It was just whether he could do it enough to get the win over 12. If you're going to ask me what kind of style Josh Taylor has, I'd say it's energetic and fast, revolving around explosiveness in that southpaw stance. So, you had a few 1-1-2s that looked a little bit like Errol Spence, where the double jab is used both to close the range and also to get that dominant outside foot position. You occasionally see a few angle switches like Lomachenko. With these, you sometimes see a decoy punch being used, or sometimes not, in order to get to the opponent's weaker left side. And of course, this opens up shots to the head and body. Taylor also resembles Spence in having a very sneaky counter left uppercut on the inside. It's a shot that's often missed by fans, but it does pay dividends down the stretch. And finally, of course, Taylor has that mad right hook when the opponent is moving backwards. If you watch Taylor closely, you can often see him feinting a left hand. He then transfers his way over to his right for that power right hook, while also getting his head off the centre line. And if it does connect, you definitely notice it. But could he land the shots consistently? I was doing a little bit of writing on this fight, and to be honest, I didn't think he could, or at least not enough to win the fight. I thought that the counter body shots, underrated power and overall balance of Prograis would be enough to nick enough of the early and middle rounds to win. And in truth, I wasn't actually that far wrong. If I can find it, I'll stick that original article in the description below. If Taylor was going to win, he was going to have to find a way of getting inside regularly and overwhelming Prograis, and in the early rounds, he just wasn't getting close. Feints and single jabs just weren't doing the job, as they rarely do against a counterpuncher, and Taylor was regularly eating long left counters to the body, and those big right hooks that Taylor likes to throw were being rolled, slipped, and occasionally countered. And after 4, something just had to change. Taylor began proving another old boxing saying right. The head moves, but the body doesn't, and began dipping under the jab and throwing left hooks to the body. They didn't always land clean, but they'd often hit something. In fighting someone like Prograis, sometimes it's less about the shots you land clean, and more about just getting them out of their rhythm, and just having the fight begin to take place where Taylor wanted it. He was almost saying, hey, you've had your fun, but now you're in my world. When someone brings you into a boxing gym, you're told how to use your feet and how to use your hands, but rarely your shoulder. After Taylor got inside, he'd often need a bit of space to get those hooks and uppercuts off, and what better way than a little nudge with a shoulder? It's not exactly honest boxing, and really a number of times it was just flat out illegal, but it allowed Taylor to create space when he wanted to for his own shots, and doubled up as backing Prograis to the ropes when Taylor could do his best work. In short, Prograis was the one who was having to start to make adjustments. Taylor began throwing jabs to the chest and the neck, not to land, but just to close the distance and land the body shots. Most slip boxers tend to be pretty similar when it comes to slipping. The jabs often slip by bending from the waist rather than from at the knees or taking it on the gloves. And despite opening up counter punch opportunities, it can leave you in a bad position if you dip at the wrong moment. It's kind of like juggling. You look great and feel great when it's all going well, but if you lose sight of one of those balls, everything is going to come crashing down. As the fight went on, you see Prograis starting to bend from the waist on the inside, expecting a jab to only open up his ribs for a left hook. Taylor also just played it pretty simple at times. Why waste a load of energy dipping and diving when the jab comes, when you can just take it on the gloves? He was also getting pretty creative with it. Imagine you've got a fighter who's ducking and diving all over the place. He's hard to hit and you're looking to lead him into a punch that he doesn't see coming. So how about you dip down, feint a jab, and when they do dip, come driving up from the bottom with the uppercut. It is subtle, but when Taylor had his best moments, it was often when he had Prograis guessing wrong, mixing up the uppercuts, hooks and straights. He also realised that in boxing you can do more than just punch to the head. Like Lomachenko, he used some subtle hand movements to either steer Prograis towards the ropes or just push his head one way to open up a body shot in the other. And combined with some simple counter jabs, it really is a case of, on first glance it's a war, but on a second analysis it's more like a highly skilled chess. Despite watching the fight 5 or 6 times for this video, I still haven't actually scored it from start to finish apart from that first viewing, when I gave it to Prograis by a point. Even a good fight I can't watch over and over. But out of respect I'm going to have to. I mean, I can't not after doing all the work for this video. I'll put my scorecard in the comments below. But whoever I think did win, I do think Taylor showed both sides to his game here. An aggressive inside fighter who's willing to break your ribs and then break your will. And the intelligent boxer with the amateur pedigree that's able to switch his tactics on the fly to adapt against a top opponent. And in a way, it would be great if the story ended there. But in January 2020, Taylor cut ties with the McGuigans and Cyclone Promotions, the people who had guided him from the start of his pro career, citing breaches of contract and in particular, conflicts of interest, signing to MTK Global and Top Rank. It's unclear what these conflicts of interest are for sure due to ongoing legal proceedings, but from what Taylor has said, it seems like he was unhappy for a while. In a great interview from Boxing Social, he said that he felt left out from the Cyclone team, that they didn't try and make him feel like part of the family as he dropped everything and moved from Scotland to down in London without so much as a phone call to see how he's doing. This may seem a little bit juvenile, but if you are a trainer and you know that your fighter is making sacrifices to be working with you, and you know they potentially have options elsewhere, surely it's in your best interest that you do everything you can to maintain that relationship and to make them feel at home. And seeing the Shane McGuigan interview only makes me take Taylor's side more. Shane talks about the 4.5 years that his dad invested in him, and that he himself feels betrayed that he put in all this work into a fighter to only have him go somewhere else. But I'm sorry, that's the nature of being a trainer. Your fighter is there for his best interest, and you as the trainer get paid for your time. Being a boxer is a short career, and being a trainer just isn't. You risk less being a trainer. Shane has Lawrence Okoli and Luke Campbell in the gym, and in 5 years' time when they move on or lose, Shane will have new guys. Taylor is making the best decision for himself in moving over to MTK and Top Rank, and I can only feel glad for him. I just don't see that bitterness in his interview that I do with Shane, and now we're getting closer to a unification with Jose Ramirez, or even a Crawford fight at 147. Taylor has since settled on Ben Davidson as a coach over Adam Booth, and to be honest, I think I prefer Booth as a coach for Taylor, just taking into account his experience. But I don't blame Taylor wanting to be the main man in the gym, because at 29 and with his type of style, Taylor is in his prime and needs to make those selfish decisions for his career. Regarding the McGuigans, it may also be the case where the fighter just outgrows their promoter. And with legal issues surrounding the McGuigans and Frampton, which has since been settled out of court, I'm happy that Taylor has gone his own way. I can never be mad at a fighter going in the direction he wants to go if it's legal for him to do so. And despite the COVID situation, Taylor has come out of it better than most. With a win against his mandatory and 2 belts to his name, it's really not to be sniffed at. Boxing really is a short career and Taylor knows it, especially with his kind of style. But hopefully there is still plenty left in the career of Josh Taylor, and I'll be the first one tuning in to watch, even if he is Scottish.
Let's go. Oh, that's beautiful.